I used to believe that families didn't leave their own behind. I used to believe a lot of things. The morning after my graduation was crisp and bright, the kind of English summer day that almost made you believe in new beginnings. The sun glazed the rooftops of our small town like honey, and my heart beat fast with hope. I'd done it. Against every quiet insult, every "you'll never make it, Charlotte," every slammed door and ignored achievement, I'd finished school. I'd made it through. Mum said she wanted to celebrate as a family. Those words alone nearly made me cry. She'd even smiled at me. One of her thin, distant smiles that always carried a hidden edge. We piled into the car, Mum in the front with her sunglasses, Graham, my stepfather behind the wheel, and my stepbrother Adam and stepsister Leanne arguing over the aux cord in the back seat. I sat by the window, clutching my little graduation envelope, the one my favorite teacher, Miss Dawson, had given me with a handwritten note. "You have a light in you, Charlotte. Don't let anyone dim it." I should have known that light was about to be tested. We drove out of town, past the fields and into the countryside. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Somewhere quiet." Mum said, "You'll see." I remember thinking maybe she'd planned a picnic, or a surprise visit to one of those cozy tea places she used to love before she met Graham. But then, as the minutes turned into an hour, the air in the car shifted. Graham was silent, the kind of silence that prickled. We turned down a narrow road, lined with tall hedges and the occasional worn-out signpost. I glanced at the fuel gauge. It wasn't a place people just drove to. Then he pulled over beside an old bus stop. There wasn't a house in sight, just wild grass, an empty bench, and the distant hum of wind through trees. "Get out," Graham said flatly. I laughed, unsure if it was a joke. "What? Why?" Mum turned to look at me, expression unreadable behind her glasses. "You're grown now," she said. "You've finished school. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet. I blinked. "What do you mean?" Graham opened the boot and dropped a faded blue backpack on the dirt. My backpack? The one I'd used for years. Mum handed me a small envelope. Inside were 3 20-pound notes. "Good luck out there," she said softly, and for a moment I thought she was crying. But when I looked closer, I realized her eyes were dry. Adam snickered from the window. "Guess you're not part of the family road trip anymore, Charlie." Leanne smirked, phone already up to take a selfie. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a trembling whisper. "You're joking. Right, Mum? Please, where am I supposed to go?" She looked away. Graham started the engine. The car rolled forward before I even had the chance to grab my bearings. Dust curled around my shoes as they drove off, the sound of the tires fading into silence. I stood there for a long time, long enough for the shadows to shift and the chill of the evening to sink into my bones. I tried calling home, no answer. I tried again, blocked. And that's when the truth sank in, not like a blow, but like cold water creeping up your spine. They weren't coming back. The bus stop was old, with chipped green paint and graffiti carved into the bench. I sat there with my backpack on my knees, trying not to cry. Inside it were a few clothes, my sketchbook, and the small silver locket that used to belong to my real dad. He died when I was 9. Everything good seemed to leave me after that. I watched the road until the stars appeared. One bus passed that night, its headlights cutting through the darkness like hope itself, but I didn't have the courage to flag it down. Where would I even go? When the cold finally bit into my skin, I curled up on the bench and opened my sketchbook. The pages smelled faintly of pencil, lead, and dreams I'd once believed in. I drew the bus stop, the fields, and the sliver of moon above me, because drawing was the only thing that made me feel human. At some point, I whispered to myself, "This can't be the end. It's just a beginning I didn't choose." I woke up the next morning to birdsong and a stiff neck. My phone was at 2% battery. I scrolled through old photos, me smiling in my graduation gown, Mum half-heartedly clapping in the background, Graham staring at his phone. That was my last family photo. I walked to the main road with my $1.60 and no plan. Every step felt heavier than the last, but I kept going. Because what else could I do? As I passed a cracked mirror someone had left by the roadside, I caught a glimpse of my reflection. My eyes were red and swollen, but there was something new there too, a spark. Maybe Miss Dawson was right. Maybe there was a light in me, one they couldn't destroy by leaving me behind. So I took a deep breath, tightened the straps on my backpack, and whispered, "Fine. You want me to stand on my own 2 feet. Watch me." And that's how my story began, not in triumph, but in the quiet ache of being unwanted. London wasn't what I expected. I had imagined something out of a storybook, glowing lights, possibility at every corner, the smell of roasted chestnuts and dreams. But the city I arrived in was loud, gray, and indifferent. It swallowed people whole. The bus ride from the countryside took almost 4 hours. I used one of my 20-pound notes for the ticket, the driver giving me a look that said he'd seen hundreds of lost girls like me before. Maybe he had. I sat in the back, staring out the window as fields turned to concrete, and silence turned to noise. When we arrived at Victoria Station, I stepped off with my faded backpack and my fear. The crowd surged around me like a tide, and I realized something sharp and painful: no one cared who I was or where I came from. That thought should have crushed me. Instead, it felt freeing. The first night, I slept on a bench near the station. I pretended to be waiting for someone until the lights dimmed, and the guards shooed everyone away. The pavement was cold, my stomach ached, and I kept my hand around my locket like it was a heartbeat. The next morning, I started walking. I didn't know where to go, so I followed the smell of coffee. That led me to a little diner tucked between 2 shops. A "Help Wanted" sign clung to the fogged-up window. Inside, the air was warm and heavy with the scent of frying bacon. A woman behind the counter eyed me carefully. She was in her 40s, with streaks of gray in her ponytail, and the kind of tired kindness you only find in people who have been hurt before. "Looking for work, love?" she asked. "Yes." I croaked, my voice small. "Anything." She hesitated, then handed me a rag. "Start by cleaning the tables. We'll talk after the lunch rush." Her name was Marcy, and she paid me in cash. It wasn't much, but it was something. For 2 weeks, I cleaned, scrubbed, and tried to stay invisible. Every night, I found a different corner to sleep in, sometimes a cheap hostel, sometimes a train carriage when I could sneak on unnoticed. I'd save every coin, every note, writing down what I earned and what I spent in a little notebook. It made me feel in control, even when I wasn't. The night I fainted, it was raining that evening. The city's lights blurred into ribbons on the wet pavement, and my shoes squelched with each step. I hadn't eaten properly in days. The diner had cut my shifts because business was slow. I told myself to keep walking just until I found shelter, but my body had other plans. I remember the dizziness first, then the ground rushing up to meet me. My backpack hit the pavement with a dull thud, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was wrapped in a blanket that smelled of lavender and dust. I was lying on a sofa, surrounded by flowers, roses, tulips, lilies, a small jungle of color and scent. "Ah, you're awake?" a voice said. I turned my head. An elderly woman with kind blue eyes was sitting beside me, holding a cup of tea. She wore a cardigan that looked like it had stories woven into it. "You fainted outside my shop?" she said. "Gave me quite the fright. Name's Mrs. Bennett, and you are Charlotte." I whispered, "Charlotte Evans." "Well, Charlotte Evans," she said gently, handing me the tea. "You look like you've been through a storm. Drink up." "Mrs. Bennett's flowers, Mrs." Bennett owned a small flower shop called Bennett's Blooms. It wasn't fancy chipped paint, a crooked sign, and a bell that jingled like laughter every time someone opened the door. She let me stay in the small room above the shop, just until you get back on your feet. In return, I helped her arrange flowers, clean the windows, and carry heavy boxes. It was quiet work, but I loved it. There was something healing about flowers, the way they bloomed even after being cut, their brief beauty a small act of defiance against time. Sometimes Mrs. Bennett would talk as we worked. She'd tell me about her late husband, about how the shop used to be bustling before the big supermarkets took over. Other times, she'd just hum softly to the radio while I swept the floors. One evening, she looked up from her bouquet and said, "You have clever hands, dear, gentle too. You could make something beautiful of yourself if you wanted." That night, I opened my sketchbook again, for the first time since the bus stop. I started drawing her shop, the way light filtered through the dusty window, the way petals scattered like snow when the breeze blew in. I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was beginning again, the turning point months past. I started studying again using the old laptop Mrs. Bennett lent me. There were free online courses, design, art, business, anything I could find. I'd stay up late, the glow of the screen my new sunrise. Mrs. Bennett would bring me tea at midnight and scold me gently. "You'll burn yourself out, child." But she'd smile all the same. One evening, she found me crying quietly at the counter. A letter had come, a scholarship rejection. It was my third one. "I'm not good enough," I said, Mrs. Bennett sat beside me. Good enough for who? For them, for the world. She placed her wrinkled hand over mine. "Listen, darling, the world doesn't give kindness easily, but that doesn't mean you're unworthy of it. The best revenge is not anger. It's success with kindness. Make them remember you not for what they did, but for what you became." I didn't know then how much those words would shape me. The day she left Mrs. Bennett grew weaker over the next year. The first time she forgot the name of her favorite rose variety, I knew something was wrong. Soon, she couldn't come downstairs at all. On her last day, I sat by her bedside, holding her hand. She smiled faintly. "Charlotte, promise me one thing." "Anything," I whispered. "When you make your mark in this world, and you will name something after this little shop, let it live on, even if I don't." Tears blurred my eyes. "I promise." She squeezed my hand, soft as petals. Then, just before dawn, she was gone. The departure, I buried her in a small cemetery on the outskirts of London, beside her husband. Her headstone was simple, engraved with her favorite line, "To plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow." I stood there with a handful of white lilies, and for the first time since my family left me, I cried without shame. The next day, I packed my things in my sketchbook, her old locket that she'd left me, and the shop's key. I locked the door one last time and slipped the key under the flower pot. Before I left, I wrote a note. "Thank you for teaching me how to grow again." Then I boarded a plane bound for New York. A scholarship finally approved after months of trying. A new life. A new name. As the plane lifted off, I pressed my forehead to the window and whispered, "Watch me, Mrs. Bennett. I'll make something beautiful for you, for me, for the girl who refused to disappear." It's strange how cities can hold versions of you that no longer exist. When I landed in New York, I was 20, 1 year old with one suitcase, pound 42 left in my account, and a single promise echoing in my mind: make something beautiful. The air smelled different here, sharper, faster, full of opportunity and noise. The streets pulsed with energy, people rushing towards something I couldn't yet name. I wasn't anyone then. Just Charlotte Evans, a scholarship student with calloused hands and a heart patched together with stubbornness. But I had Mrs. Bennett's words like a compass, and I had hunger not for food this time, but for meaning. The beginning of the bloom, I studied design and business at Parsons during the day, and worked nights at a small cafe downtown. The owner, an ex-artist named Marco, used to tease me for sketching on napkins between customers. "Kid," he'd say, "you've got an eye for elegance. Don't waste it on cappuccinos." But those napkin sketches became my first design concepts. Soft lines, minimalist spaces filled with warmth and memory. I started an online portfolio. I entered small competitions. Most I lost, some I placed. By graduation, I had a portfolio full of small triumphs and bigger dreams. Then one day, an email arrived. Harrington Interiors, a respected firm in Manhattan, had noticed my work. They offered me an internship. It paid almost nothing, but it was everything. Learning the game, the world of luxury design was brutal. Deadlines, egos, people with money who believed they were gods. At first, I made tea and carried samples. I watched silently as designers argued over the shade of white walls and $1 million rugs. But I learned. I observed how they sold emotion, not just space. How they made people feel seen through marble, light, and color. Late at night, when everyone left, I'd stay behind and sketch layouts under the soft hum of fluorescent lights. The janitor, a kind old man named Lewis, once said, "You work like you're chasing ghosts, kid." Maybe I was. One evening, a senior designer called in sick before a major client presentation. I had prepared all the materials, so when my boss panicked, I spoke up. "I can do it," I said. He hesitated, then waved his hand. "Fine, don't ruin it." I didn't. I redesigned half the presentation, spoke with quiet confidence, and ended with a concept that made the client cry. A home that feels like forgiveness. The next morning, my boss called me in. "You're promoted," he said. "You've got steel in your voice, Evans. Use it." That was the moment everything changed. Becoming Charlotte Bloom 5 years later, I walked away from Harrington Interiors with a small savings account and a vision that burned like fire. I started my own studio in a rented loft above a bakery in Brooklyn. The walls smelled of yeast and ambition. I named it Bennett and Bloom. Bennett for the woman who saved me, Bloom for what I refused to stop doing. At first, I designed small cafes, apartments, and boutique hotels. Then, one project, a Manhattan penthouse for a young philanthropist, went viral after a magazine feature. Suddenly, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. I hired a team, investors followed. Within 3 years, we had offices in London, Paris, and New York. Our motto was simple: spaces that remember who you are. People loved the story behind the brand, though no one knew the truth behind its founder. Charlotte Bloom became a symbol of elegance, resilience, and mystery. Charlotte Evans was gone. The invitation success is loud, but loneliness is louder. I lived in high rises and traveled first class, but sometimes when I walked past a family laughing in a park, I'd feel that old ache again: the bus stop, the dust, the silence of being unwanted. Then one morning, my assistant handed me an envelope with gold lettering. "Invitation for you, MS. Bloom," she said. "Seems personal." It was from England, my hometown. Inside, on thick ivory paper, were the words: Evans Family Reunion and Business Showcase, celebrating new beginnings and family legacy. Hosted by Graham and Margaret Evans, my breath caught. My family, I read it again, heart pounding. I hadn't heard their names in 13 years. They were hosting a real estate event, one that, ironically, involved interior collaborations. The guest list included investors, designers, and local press. A note scribbled at the bottom in my mother's handwriting: "If you're in England, do come by. We'd love to reconnect." Reconnect, as if they hadn't left me on the side of the road like an old piece of luggage. I almost tore it up. Almost, but then a different thought took root: calm, quiet, powerful. What would they say if they saw me now? The preparation the next few weeks passed in a haze. I told no one my real reason for traveling to England. My team assumed I was attending a design conference. When the day came, I stood before the mirror in my London penthouse, tailored ivory suit, hair swept back, diamond earrings catching the light. I looked every inch the woman I had become, but inside my heart was trembling. For years, I had imagined this moment: what I'd say, how I'd feel. But now that it was here, I didn't want revenge. I wanted closure. Still, I couldn't deny the sweetness of the thought. They won't even recognize me. I stepped into the waiting limo, the door closing with a quiet thud that sounded like an ending, or maybe, finally, a beginning. The arrival. The Evans family estate looked smaller than I remembered. The grand house had been renovated, but not well. All show, no soul. Expensive emptiness. The driveway was lined with rented cars and cameras. I stepped out of the limo, heels clicking on the cobblestones. Heads turned, whispering followed. Who is she? Is that Charlotte Bloom, the designer? She's even more beautiful in person. Inside, chandeliers gleamed and laughter spilled from the hall. My mother was at the center of it all, smiling that same polished smile, her arm looped through Graham's. Adam and Leanne stood nearby, older but unchanged, their eyes full of entitlement. None of them recognized me. Not yet. The moment I stepped through the doors, the air shifted. The room smelled of perfume, champagne, and pretension, that peculiar scent of people desperate to impress one another. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across the marble floor, and a jazz quartet played in the corner, their music lost beneath the hum of conversations. My heels clicked against the tiles, steady, deliberate. Heads turned as I entered. The hostess rushed over, beaming too widely. "Ms. Bloom, we're honored you could join us tonight. Mr. Evans will be thrilled. He's been talking about your company's designs all week." I smiled politely. "Has he? Now, if only he knew." Strangers with familiar faces, I found them near the main table. My mother, Margaret Evans, in a satin dress that shimmered beneath the lights. Graham, her husband, heavier now, his hair graying but his arrogance intact. Adam and Leanne, older, sharper, their laughter brittle as glass. They looked like strangers wearing the faces of my past. I lingered at the edge of the crowd, listening. Graham was explaining his latest real estate project to a group of investors. A luxury development that, by the sound of it, was crumbling under debt. My mother laughed too loudly, covering his missteps with charm. "Ah, Mrs. Evans," the hostess interrupted, tugging lightly on her sleeve. "You must meet our special guest, Charlotte Bloom, the designer." My mother turned toward me, smile still frozen on her face. "Ms. Bloom," she said, extending her hand, "what a pleasure. I've followed your work for years. Your designs are breathtaking." Her tone was polite, professional. "Empty, she didn't recognize me. Thank you," I replied, shaking her hand. Her perfume hit me jasmine and something nostalgic, cruelly familiar. "You remind me of someone," she said suddenly, tilting her head. "Your eyes. I knew a girl once with eyes like yours." My lips curved into a faint smile. "Did you?" She nodded, but the conversation moved on before her memory could catch up. Graham joined us, puffing out his chest. "Charlotte Bloom, my wife's been raving about your company. We've been meaning to reach out, could use your touch on our new project." I looked at him evenly. "Oh, what kind of project?" "Luxury development on family land," he said proudly. "Evans Estate Properties. It'll be our legacy." Legacy. I almost laughed. Echoes of the past. Leanne approached next, champagne glass in hand. "Love your earrings," she said, smiling with the same smirk she'd worn when she was 15 and called me charity case. "Thank you," I replied. "They were a gift." Her gaze slid toward the crowd. "Must be nice, living that kind of life. Fancy cars, magazines, designers. You must have had quite the start." "Yes," I said softly, letting my eyes meet hers. "Quite the start." Something flickered in her expression, a faint unease, though she couldn't place why. Adam, now in an ill-fitting suit, joined her. "Charlotte Bloom," he said, shaking my hand too tightly. "Big fan. Maybe you'd consider designing my flat sometime." "Perhaps," I said, smiling, though I specialize in spaces with a heart. He laughed awkwardly, clearly missing the weight of the words. I could have revealed myself right there, thrown the truth like a blade across the table. But I waited. I wanted them to see me, to really see me. The reveal the evening rolled on. Speeches were made. Graham boasted about family unity, about the Evans legacy of perseverance. I stood in the shadows, hands folded around a glass of water, heart steady. When the hostess took the microphone to thank the evening's sponsors, she smiled and said, "And now, a special thanks to our distinguished guest and one of tonight's largest silent contributors, Ms. Charlotte Bloom, founder and CEO of Bennett and Bloom." The room broke into applause. Flashbulbs went off. My mother's hands clapped automatically, until the words Bennett and Bloom seemed to sink in. Her smile faltered. I stepped forward as cameras turned toward me. "Thank you," I began, voice clear. "It's lovely to be here, though I must confess, this isn't the first time I've stood on the grounds of an Evans property." Graham frowned. "I beg your pardon." I turned to face them, my mother, my stepfather, my step. Siblings, every ghost of my childhood standing before me, trapped in their confusion. 13 years ago," I continued, "you left a girl at a bus stop not far from here. You gave her £60 and a backpack. You told her good luck out there. The crowd fell silent. Graham's face went pale. Leanne's glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. My mother's lips trembled. Charlotte, I met her gaze. Yes, Charlotte Evans, though I don't use that name anymore. The silence after truth for a long moment. No one spoke. Then my mother's eyes filled with tears, whether from guilt, shame, or the sudden loss of composure. I didn't know. Charlotte, save it. I said gently, not cruelly. I'm not here for apologies. I've made peace with what you did. I just wanted you to see the life that grew from the seed you tried to bury. Graham stammered something about doing what was best for the family, but his voice was hollow. You were afraid of me, I said quietly. Of what I'd become if I had the chance, and you were right to be afraid. The cameras were still flashing. Whispers rippled through the room like a storm tide. I turned back to the crowd, smiling politely. To everyone here, thank you for this evening. It's a pleasure to stand where my story began and to finally know how it ends. And with that, I walked away. The drive away, the night air was cool against my skin as I stepped outside. The limo waited, door open, engine purring softly. As I slid inside, the driver looked at me through the rear-view mirror. All right, ma'am. I exhaled long and slow. Better than I've been in years. As we pulled away, I glanced back at the glowing estate in the distance, the place that had once been my whole world. It looked smaller now, almost fragile. I thought of Mrs. Bennett, of her voice saying the best revenge is success with kindness. I had succeeded, and I had been kind even when they hadn't deserved it. The epilogue of forgiveness a week later, I returned to London and visited the little flower shop I'd reopened in Mrs. Bennett's name, Bloom House. Inside, young women from foster homes and shelters were learning design, art, and business. Their laughter filled the space like sunlight. One of the girls asked Miss Bloom, "Is it true you met the royal family?" I smiled. "No, darling, but I met the people who taught me what family really isn't. And that's just as important." That evening, I stood by the window, watching the golden hour spill through the glass. My reflection stared back, older, stronger, free. For a moment, I saw the girl at the bus stop again, thin, scared, clutching her backpack under a fading sky. I whispered to her softly, "We made it." And she smiled.